Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We have, I think, 9 more days before the August 11th primary. And we've just been knocking on doors, making phone calls, doing everything that we can to get people out. And tonight we're going to start out with the architect of the voter turnout for the Minnesota 5th, AG Keith Ellison. How are you, Brother Keith?
Oh, I'm hanging in there. I'm very excited about Ilhan Omar. You're doing it. You're getting out here and you are leading the way. So thank you. I could not be prouder of you, and I'm so honored that you have maintained that principle of putting the people first.
I really appreciate it's big shoes to fill. So I really appreciate having your support. I know you and I talked about this, but I said to someone before that it's like getting a job review from the person that used to have your job. And so it means a great deal to me to have as a constituent, somebody who knows what it means to be in the seat, who knows what it means to be a progressive leader in Congress, who knows what it means to turn out votes in the fifth, and to make it the epicenter of really where progress happens for our state.
Well, let me tell you, I've always believed, and I know you believe too, and you and I share this value, is that elections are not just about winning the election. Elections are an opportunity to re-engage and build a strong relationship with the people who you would speak for. You cannot have a relationship with people that you don't talk to, and you can't talk to them unless you go to them. If all you do is flood somebody's mailbox with a bunch of mailers, look, let's keep it real. We all know what happens to them mailers about 5 seconds after we get them, right? You can't ask a mailer a question. You can't tell a mailer your difficulty with your rent, with your health care. You can't do the same thing with a TV commercial. You can't tell a TV commercial that you simply cannot afford your insulin. You've got to have that door knock. You've got to have that live stream where you can call in and ask a question. You've got to have that human contact. And if Democrats, and I'm talking about Democrats writ large, ever walked away from this idea that it's all about winning the election and replace that with the idea that it's about building a relationship with the people who we represent, which takes place 365 days a year on election year or off election year, then the elections wouldn't be a problem. But because Democrats, not you, Ilhan, but Democrats in general, think, oh yeah, well, we'll get back to them around election time. That's why people are like sometimey with us. So they're sometimey with us because we're sometimey with them. But what I'm telling you is that Ilhan is with people every single day. And Ilhan, I just want to say to you, may God bless you and your family. I know what you went through with your dad. He was a lovely man. I had a chance to get to know him, and he was so proud of you. And I know how you feel. And usually when somebody loses somebody, they don't really know because they haven't really lost a parent. But I've lost a parent due to COVID. And I could tell you that, it really is a failure of public policy. I mean, who knows whether we'd still have our loved ones.
Right.
But we do know that statistically, a lot of people would still be around if we had somebody in the White House who was serious about protecting people. And so I'll tell you this, that our country, and I'll wrap it up here, our country is in the midst of a momentous change. Right now, I was so proud to see so many people talking about antitrust, so many people talking about healthcare, like you, Ilhan, so many people talking about how homes for all, as every major city in America has people living in tents by the roadside, not just Minneapolis, DC too, LA too, Houston, Chicago, all of them. You drive down the street, people are living in recreational tents because even though Jeff Bezos got $178 billion since COVID started, we don't have enough money to house people in this country. And you, Ilhan, are standing up to say no. Let me just say this about your opponent, then I'm going to wrap it up. I have nothing bad to say about him because I don't know him, never met him. And I would think that after, being in Congress for 12 years, serving in the state legislature for 4, being in the attorney general's office for a year and a half, I would have met the guy working on education, right? Working on small business, working on housing, working on climate, working on, You name anything. Who are these pop-up people who we never met, make it into their 40s, and decide that the first foray into public service is to be your congressperson? This is absurd. And I hope people just say no to this. It is absolutely wrong. And I would just say to you, Ilhan, that you are the right person at the right time. And we need people to turn out big time for you. I don't want you just to win. I want you to win with a big, big, fat number so that we can demonstrate to the people of this world that the 5th District loves Ilhan Omar. Not because we're enthralled with your personality, though you do have a great personality, but because you stand for the right things. We stand with you because you stand for us, for the kids who are fighting off these ridiculous student loans, for the people who need healthcare, for the people who need homes. Politics is not a personality contest. It shouldn't be. For you, it's all about that policy, and you stood with that policy, so I'm standing with you. And I do have to apologize to hit the door now, but nothing but love to everybody out there, especially you, Ilhan, but to Bonnie Watson Coleman, all of our colleagues. Keep the progressive drive alive. Send Ilhan Omar back to Congress. And with that,
thank you, Keith. It is just really exciting to have the opportunity to be part of the conversation now of policies that are possible, like the $15 minimum wage that you have been pushing for so long. To see so many members of Congress talking about holding corporations accountable in the ways in which when you were talking about it, it felt like you were alone, right? And so it's really exciting to see that kind of energized base that is saying we need to take our country back. We need to be in the forefront of putting people in the center of politics, people in the center of making decisions, people in the center of coming up with solutions to address, the severe disparities we have across our country. So thank you for leading the way, and thank you for making us believe we can have these conversations.
Bless you, my friend. We can do it. So see you soon.
That's Attorney General Keith Ellison, who was my predecessor and served in Congress. And I know Representative Bonnie Watson Coleman used to serve with him as well. And now I do get the opportunity to be your colleague. I know for many of us, we get to have these conversations about what progressive values are. We get to talk about what is possible. And oftentimes we forget that there are really the OGs like Keith Ellison and yourself and others who have been pounding the pavement, talking about the policies that we are now seeing as part of the national discourse long before they were part of that dialogue and that debate. And I know you and I have gotten the opportunity to work on, actually, I will say 3 things that are very important to me. One is the task force we put together that deals with the rise of Black adolescent suicide rate. And, I remember when we first had this conversation, I told you how I had a Black son, and how oftentimes, right, it's not just the women who are told to be strong in our community, but it's often our men. And our young boys are given message early on that they're not supposed to cry, that they're supposed to be a man about whatever. And so that now we're seeing this rise in suicide. We're seeing that there is depression in our communities with our young boys, that there are these problems that continue to persist. And if we don't collectively address it and get to have these conversations and get to the root of it, then we're not going to have an opportunity to save our Black boys. And we're not going to have an opportunity to actualize what Black Lives Matter really means when we talk about our communities. And then we also worked on the Push Out Act, which addresses, again, an issue that is very personal to both of us, right? These are issues of discipline and, being treated as unworthy within the education system when you are a young Black woman. and what that does to the contribution of the disparities in education, the disparities in the outcome for us as adults later on. And I just want you to say a little bit about what drew you to those two policies and what it means to actually have people who not only listen to their constituents, are connected and have fluency to the day-to-day challenges of their constituents, but also come from a perspective and an experience that is forcing them to urgently act and address these issues.
Well, first of all, let me just say that I'm just so happy to be here with you tonight.
Yes.
And to be part of, to send Ilhan Omar back to Congress where she belongs, because Congress desperately needs you. Congress is different right now than it has ever been, and we just have so much more to get done. But in order to get that done, we've got to have people like you there with us. So let me start by saying this. I want to talk about the policy, but I want to talk about the fact that you are one of the most progressive members of our Congress, our caucus, and we need you back there. And I know that you are experiencing a torrent of corporate dollars coming at you, and folks who really don't think like we think when it comes to everyday working families and lifting up those who are least among us. So I want to make sure that they understand that right now, this very moment, they need to go to ilhanomar.com/.give and give whatever you can, because I know that your campaigns are always fueled by everyday working families putting in a few dollars here and a few dollars there. And yeah, you're absolutely right. We did look at issues that confront Black boys and Black girls. And we also confronted an issue together, you and I, and that was to make sure that there were guaranteed jobs for everybody in every community in underserved areas of work who deserve them, and that we would get the money to pay for those jobs with the transactional fees that get charged out there on Wall Street, and that with that $770 billion over a period of time, we could put it to good use. You know, we, for the first time, I think Congress has taken up issues that it never really thought of collectively. We started the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls because they never talked about the intersection of being Black or minority and being female, and the public policies and the laws that got promoted and ultimately passed. How did they affect us? I'm a Black woman with a Black son. I have a Black granddaughter who is in elementary school. So both of those bills that you talked about, the one with regard to mental health issues and suicide, and the work that we did on that task force, and the bill that came out of that task force is going to put billions of dollars into making sure that there's greater access to mental health care, whether it's in the schools, in the communities, in the faith-based communities, or just educating the families. And the Push Out Act, we had a chance to do something about that with the George Floyd Policing Act, as we reimagine what law enforcement looks like and take some of that money out of law enforcement and put it in schools for extra counselors and extra services and extra programs, and take those police officers out of our schools. Right. Because they only know how, unfortunately right now, to get interactively aggressive and remove our girls for things that shouldn't happen. And we shouldn't be addressing things such as dress codes and hair and hairstyles as if that's an expression of anything other than your taste and what you want to look like at that moment. There's so much more work to do. And I know that we're going to make a big change at the top next year. But come January, we need to hit the ground, and we need to be moving fast, and we need to be looking at jobs and housing and education and security in our communities, and the right kind of policing that should take place, and the connection of all kinds of services and mental health services and other kinds of services to make sure that the communities that have been left out and left behind will get the kind of attention and support. Let's put our money where our mouth is. So we got to send Ilhan Omar back to Congress. And I'm delighted to be on this call with all of you to make sure that we do. God bless you. God bless this campaign abundantly. Not unlike Keith. I knew about you before I met you because Keith talked about you. But unlike Keith, don't just win, blow it out so that we send a message to the people.
Well,
thanks for inviting me tonight.
Thank you, Representative. Thank you for being, you know, a guardian for us. Thank you for paving the way. Thank you for the encouragement you provide to many of us. And thank you for just being a champion and steadfast on what it means to create progress for all of us in this country in Congress. So really appreciate you taking the time to join us and to help us out. So really appreciate it. Talk to you soon. Bye. So next on deck is my sister in service, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I call her Alex. Many of you call her AOC. And I think she's good with all of it. Yeah. But my favorite title for her is Congresswoman. And so how are you, Alex?
I'm good. How are you, sis?
I'm doing good. So it's I actually was like looking forward to talking to you because, you know, you and I talk about this like through text messages and whenever we see one another, there is like all of this work that we do that is driven out of the everyday lives that we used to lead and the challenges we faced before we got to Congress, right? There are all of these people who I think have no idea that like we lived paycheck to paycheck. Yeah. You know, and like, I think this is the first time I probably could like not, you know, count pennies in trying to figure out like what you know out of my paycheck was going to go to rent, what was going to go to feed my family, what was going to go to everything else. And I think for a lot of people, the urgency in which we speak about the kind of systematic change that needs to happen is something they're not used to because I don't think they understand how hungry we are for the change. And I don't think they understand how hungry the people are to have people who come with that hunger, right? Who come with that fire, who come with that need to say, like, you're going to hear us today because we've been waiting for a long time. And, you know, I recently heard that, you know, things like the Green New Deal are like aspirational because, you know, we don't have all of Congress signed on to support the resolution. Things like our Homes for All legislation is aspirational because, you know, it's just platitudes, right? We don't have these people supporting it. We don't have members of Congress signed on. What was your response when you heard that from people? Because to me, I'm just like, we are sent to create a vision. We are sent to fight for that vision. And we are sent to create the kind of policies that are actually going to address, right, the gravity of the problems that we have. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, you know, I think it's so funny when people say that because the kind of invisible thing that they're not saying is ... so you shouldn't try, right? And I always find it so wild because, you know, we know this, that the bar for us, the bar for you as your freshman, as a freshman member, the bar for me as a freshman member, for Ayanna, Rashida, everybody is so much higher than it is normally for a lot of, you know, especially mediocre Republican freshmen. So it's like, oh, you introduced this sweeping legislation. Why didn't you pass it yet? And we're like, first of all, we've been here for 5 minutes. Second of all, even with resolutions like the Green New Deal or your housing resolution or lots of other big progressive resolutions, we've actually been creeping towards getting a majority of the Democratic caucus signed on board. And so a lot of people think that there's only like 2 people on the Green New Deal. No, there's over 100 members signed on of Congress signed on to the Green New Deal. And especially when it comes to federal legislation, it's not like
taking it apart and like introducing it as standalone bills and passing it as amendments to major bills that have passed Congress. So it's almost like you don't really pay attention to the work that we put in every single day. when you come with like these criticisms, because, like the work that we do in our committees, and like the effort that it takes to get as many amendments passed, right? Like as freshmen who are not seen as frontline freshmen, who are not getting like amendments sent to them to right? Like the relationships it takes, right? Like I lead my delegation in Minnesota with the number of amendments passed. And then people are like, well, that don't matter. And I'm like, well, do you understand like the amount of effort, right? Like that it takes for freshmen like you and I to be able to get one amendment passed, let alone, right, like double digits, and like dozens. And I think that I think people see like our celebrity status, they see like the amount of support we have outside, and oftentimes like they forget how challenging it is to be in an environment that that like doesn't expect you to succeed, right? Like doesn't.
I think a lot of people, they don't know about that like curtain for sure. And despite all of that, I think it's so important that, and I mean, I know your constituents know this, but it's so important for, I think, me to tell your constituents just how incredible you've been in navigating all of those barriers. Y'all, this is not built the same way. They put bear traps in front of Ilhan. They have her run obstacle courses. They put these big wooden walls. Other people get like those little walkways that you get in the airport to get to their destination. Ilhan's out here like 007 with the lasers in the room, and she's getting things done. And she's getting remarkable things done, because when people say that we shouldn't introduce aspirational legislation, I mean, just to speak to your earlier point, Ilhan, is that we know we're not even 2 years removed from living paycheck to paycheck. And I think that's the reason why you've been such a leader in housing, and why so many of us have been leaders in housing, because we pay rent.
I still pay.
Because we know that the rent is due. I don't own a house. And so when we have record unemployment, and we're trying to preserve the unemployment, the pandemic unemployment assistance, and that's $600 a month. We know what that feels like on a week to week and a daily basis and a monthly basis. And so for us, our legislation, and we introduce legislation, we talk about these issues, we're not talking about them in terms of 2-year cycles. We're talking about the first of the month. And that makes that urgency that we often get criticized for in Washington, because it has so much more to do with like etiquette and like if you read Emily Post or not, than everything else. The reason we bring that urgency is because we know that everybody lives on a month-to-month basis and not a 2-year or year-to-year basis. And so this legislation has real consequences, especially when you talk about something like a homes guarantee. There's no such thing as too aspirational, especially when we are lagging behind the rest of the Western world. People act as though we landed from some alien spaceship, and that these ideas are completely, out of any context that we've ever seen, when we're really just trying to treat everyone as humanely as so many other countries have already chosen to.
I mean, like you probably see this in New York, but in Minneapolis, we have tent cities, right? People who are literally living, not just on the sides of the streets, but in our like parks. There are camps set up every single space you look. And to me, like when I tour them and I go to have conversations with my constituents there, it's so triggering, because I used to live in one of those, right? In a refugee camp. Like that's what you expect for people when they are either like fleeing a war, when they are being displaced because of a natural disaster. that shouldn't be a natural occurring displacement within communities that have resources to be able to house and, you know, provide mental health support and substance abuse support. Like, we have the resources, we just don't have the courage, right, and the clarity to want to have that done for them. And when people say like these are aspirational, you know, when I introduced my rent and mortgage cancellation, you and a lot of like the members in the Progressive Caucus were the first ones to sign on, right? And we do that because we know that to our constituents who are being displaced, our constituents who are missing rent and know that tomorrow they're not going to have more money coming in to like pay back that rent, right? Like, they're looking at being displaced. They're looking at, right, like what it would mean for a house, you know, the housing market to collapse. They want to be seen, and they feel seen by the pieces of legislation we introduce, because they, you know, like when people come to lobby, I don't know if you meet with lobbyists, but I often don't meet with lobbyists, right? Like, I meet with people who come to talk to me about the direct issues they're having themselves. And what I hear from them is to say, like, I want you to go work on this. And so we introduce these pieces of legislation because they want us to urgently act, and they don't want to only do what is possible, right? Like, they want there to be a vision that goes to address the issues that they're dealing with. In the same ways in which those lobbyists, right, like that come from Wall Street and like the healthcare industry and all of that, they show up with the bills to say, introduce this. Nobody says, oh, this tax cut, right? Like, that's aspirational. We shouldn't spend $1.4 trillion in that. Like, they get it done. Mm-hmm. Because it's being demanded by the people they are responsive to. And the fact that we try to introduce things in being responsive to our constituents who are struggling, and like those are the lobbying voices that we hear the most, is the thing that is the most threatening. And I often feel like those that say this isn't possible, like you're dreaming too big, oftentimes don't even want those voices heard, yes. Right? Like, that's what they're dismissing.
Yes, exactly. And I think it's so important to communicate to everybody watching that it is not an accident that I had a primary challenger funded by Wall Street, that Rashida has a primary challenger, that you have a primary challenger, because when you speak truth to power, power fights back. And it's not a coincidence that these primary challengers that have cropped up are funded by Wall Street and dark money. And so it's really one of those big, like, choose your fighter moments. Like, are you going to, you really think that a Wall Street backed, lobbyist operation is really going to be what's best for us? Or are we going to back grassroots people back candidates? And I think that, we enter these fights, and we knew that something like this probably was going to happen to all of us, because this is exactly why people don't speak up in Washington, right?
Your primary, remind people how much was spent in your primary.
So in my primary, there was let me break it down, $3 million spent against me in my primary, plus a super PAC. So we don't even know how many more millions were in the super PAC, plus my opponent, because she was a multimillionaire, loaned herself $1 million, 72 hours or so, maybe 90 hours before the election day. And so we're talking about millions and millions of dollars in dark money dumped in blue districts to primary strong voices. That is not normal. That's very unprecedented, because in politics, people usually like to get a bang for their buck, and they usually like to put in money in races that like they really think that they can tip, usually between red and blue. So when we're the ones that are attracting multi-million-dollar primary challengers in an unprecedented way, that just tells you how effective Ilhan is. That tells you how damn effective she is against big real estate, against our military industrial complex, against our Wall Street complex, against basically every corrupt institution that we have right now in this country. And they're coming for each and every one of us. But you know why we've succeeded? Because we have stayed with the people, and we don't get shook. We don't let them make us question our own values or veer off course or get uncomfortable. And that makes the entire difference, because when you are put into a really high pressure situation, that's when people start to change. That's when they start to shift. That's when they start to hedge back on their values. And that's why you see so much squirming in Washington right now. That's why that's why you aren't seeing the political courage that we need, which is why it's so important that we have folks like Ilhan who are anchoring our Congress around a moral center that is accountable to everyday people and not lobbyists or corporations that are looking to make a buck off of our public good, off of our public institutions. And we have so much of that right now, which is why it's so important that we use this opportunity to organize and to expand our base. And it's just really thrilling to see all this organizing happening, not just in Minnesota, but all these folks that are pouring in to do remote organizing with phone banks here tonight. I just can't thank each and every one of you so much, because what we need to do, like Attorney General Keith Ellison had said, like Bonnie Watson Coleman said, what we really need to do is show the strength of this movement. And we didn't win our primary in New York by like kicking back and just saying, oh, hey, like we're good. No, we worked our butts off in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of uprisings, in the middle of all of this, to make sure that every single person we out-hustled them. Again, we out-hustled them. That's always what we do. We don't outspend. We don't rely on TV appearances. We don't rely on whatever is coming out of the president's mouth. We out-hustle everybody. That's what we do. That's what Ilhan does. That's what progressives do. We outwork and we out-hustle and we out everything, because that's what defeats being outspent or even just being spent, or just having millions of bucks spent against us.
Right. And it is, I think, an opportunity for us to really show, right, what this work that we do means for people. Mm-hmm. And to show that no matter how much people try to minimize our voice and dismiss, the urgency in which we fight for change, that we're going to continue to show up. We're going to continue to fight. We're going to continue to speak up for change. We're going to continue to have a vision for what a better day looks like. And we know that it is possible because we've seen it happen every single day as we've taken on, some of the biggest challenges in Congress since the day we showed up. And so I just want to thank you. It is really, truly an honor to be on this journey with you. And I'm just grateful that you joined us tonight. And I'm sure everybody really delighted to have heard from you. Our volunteers have put in so much work today for our day of action, whether it is hitting the doors. I mean, we got lucky today. It was, really nice weather. I myself door knocked for like 4 hours. And so it is really great to see the amount of people that are out at the doors, the amount of people that are text messaging, that are calling, that are, using relational organizing and talking to their friends and family, adopting their blocks and like doing everything that they can to try to not only talk to people about voting, but getting them excited again about what this fight is about, right? Like, why do we do this? What is it that we've been organizing for the last decade? And what opportunities have we had now to have a seat at the table and to bring this fight to Congress. And so good to see you, and look forward to seeing you next week in Congress.
Yes, and make sure you're drinking water and make sure that you're eating. And please, everyone around Ilhan, please make sure that she's drinking water and ask her if she's eating, because we have to take care of her in a human level too. So everybody bring snacks.
People like forget that's what you, Ayanna, and Rashida do to me all the time. Are you eating? Because I'm not known for those two things. I'm lots of coffee.
Stay hydrated.
That to like give me energy, and then I'm like, oh, I feel faint. Is because I haven't been drinking water or eating for a week. So thank you for being a real sister and worrying.
No, of course.
I think my siblings would appreciate that. Thank you.
Bye.
So next on deck, we have Maurice, who is with the Working Families Party. And, you know, I think for a lot of people, Maurice, they don't understand the challenges and the disparities that continue to exist for working families in our country. The level of social and economic neglect, and how, you know, this pandemic really isn't the first time we're seeing people have economic challenges, right? This isn't the first time we're seeing people suffering because of like not having access to healthcare. It isn't a surprise that a Black man like my father at such a young age would lose his life to COVID-19, as so many Black men and women in our communities have lost their lives. And that kind of social economic neglect, I think, has put many of our communities in spaces where like they're like, why do I even try? Why do I organize? Why do I do anything? Because nothing changes. And the way in which you all work in your organizing effort is to remind people that power rests with us, right? Like we can be the change we want to see. And that shows up in many ways, right? That shows up in supporting candidates who embody our values, that shows up in doing the work that, you know, Alex and I were just talking about, right? Door knocking, out hustling everyone. But that also shows up in a lot of the work that we all do together as members of Congress now, which is to do the outside inside game. And that work really is what is going to produce for our families. So say a little bit about how you've seen that take shape for us in Congress.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. And I have to tell you, I am so honored that you are one of our WFP endorsed congressional candidates. And I think, you know, just speaking about the fact that we endorsed you, I think is a way to understand how we look at this inside-outside game, right? So we don't endorse everybody. We don't endorse in every single congressional race, right? So when we make endorsements, what we're endorsing is a way of thinking about governance, is this idea that people on the inside of government and people on the outside, on the streets, advocates, could develop a relationship where we see each other as comrades, we see each other as kin, and we understand that we have a different role in relationship to power. And then when we come together, we could do amazing transformative things. And so WFP, Working Families Party, endorsing Ilhan Omar is an endorsement of that strategy. We're endorsing you because you understand what it means to be accountable to the people in your district, what it means to be accountable to social movements. And not every, as we know, not every candidate understands that. Oftentimes, people inside DC and people in Capitol Hill are accountable to the interest of organized capital, right? And the conversation you were just having with Representative Ocasio-Cortez, the reality is many of your colleagues and many elected officials are having insider conversations with lobbyists and people who are connected to the pharmaceutical corporations or to the war lobby or various folks. Having somebody like you, who at the end of the day you're going to follow the dictates of your constituents and of mass movements, that means that we could actually engage in a transformative agenda. So the inside outside game to me looks like the movement for Black Lives calling out to defund the police. And then folks in Congress like yourself, you are co-sponsoring a number of bills that look to transform the relationship that Black communities and other communities have to the police, right? That relationship is key to ensuring that our social movements are always leading, are always rendering the invisible visible and shining a light to all of these injustices that didn't just crop up this year, but have always been a fabric of our society. And then to be in right relationship with people like yourself in Capitol Hill in order to do the people's bidding, right? And it's a different type of relationship than the sort of traditional accountability relationship that looks at elected officials as being something apart from movements, right? We cherish you. You are part of us. So this inside outside strategy is saying that we claim Ilhan Omar as part of our movements. And when Ilhan Omar is in Congress, the movement is with her, behind her, flanking her. And then on the streets, Ilhan Omar is flanking behind and supporting the movement, right? And so, my sister, we are honored to be shoulder to shoulder with you, to support you, to endorse you, to ensure that we are getting our national movement of activists to text and call to make sure that you get over the finish line. And we don't just want you to prevail. We want you to prevail so that you never get a corporate challenger again, so that the message is loud and clear that independent Black women, when they go to Congress, they have an army of people to support them. So challengers, come as you may, but you will be defeated.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's also like, the values you speak of, right? Like, I'm someone who doesn't take corporate PAC money. I'm someone who refuses to take money from polluters, right? I'm someone who believes in not spending my time dialing for dollars, right? We rely on the contributions and the support from those who are inspired by the vision that we have and who are connected really to the values that drive us in Congress, right? Who believe in in the social movement we fight for, who believe in the struggle that our communities are faced with every single day. And it's fascinating oftentimes that for someone like, people are surprised in many ways, and I'm fascinated by the way in which they're surprised that in all of the committees that I sit on, whether it is the budget committee or it's foreign affairs or the education and labor committee, like it is through the lens of my lived experience as someone who has been shut out of this system, right? Who represents marginalized identities who've never really have been part of that litigating process, legislating process, but have been subject to it. And people are like, oh wait, why does hunger offend you? And I'm like, well, I know what it means to be really hungry.
Yeah.
And like, we're not just going to talk about educational investment in our schools. We're going to talk about first feeding children so that we can properly educate them, and like we can expect them to test with better results when we level the playing field for them, when we house them, when we feed them, right? When we clothe them, when we understand the trauma, as Ayanna says, that they carry in their backpacks. Like, we got to take care of all of that. Then we can say, oh, okay, well, why? Like, then it makes sense, right? That those two children can be expected to test and be educated the same way. And for me, that's from a lived experience. It isn't just even out of the fact that I'm a mom of 3 school children, right? Like I am that child who is falling through those cracks and who needs, in the ways that I've gotten, like somebody to recognize that they're just going to need a little extra support in order to make it through the day. And so unless we institutionalize that support, not everyone is going to have that opportunity. And then people will say, well, if the system was so unjust, how did you make it through? And like, we don't want to like celebrate the one-offs, right?
That's right.
Right? Like it's not just the story of like Ilhan the survivor, like Ayanna the survivor, Alex the survivor. We want all of people, all of our communities who have the Ilhans, the Alexes, the Rashidas, the Ayannas living in their communities to not just have a success they can celebrate, but that success to be shared by everyone, and for it to just be like normal. That's right? Like if we had everybody housed and fed and like had an opportunity to take care of their mental health, for them to have, a network asset, an opportunity to know they can have a seat at the table, then it wouldn't just be like, oh, this first is really exciting, because then everybody would have an equal opportunity, as they say, and access to a life that is full of dignity, where their humanity is actually recognized.
Yes, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. And to me, that's the difference in approach between looking at sort of the interpersonal issues that we might experience versus the structural change that we have to make happen, right? And one of the reasons why I'm so excited about yourself and some of the newer Congress people have come in, you have that structural change sort of understanding of how we create change, right? And it's not simply sufficient for us to honor and elevate, the rare occurrence of somebody who was able to jump over or overcome all of the obstacles, all of the structural obstacles and systemic obstacles that lay at their foot due to race, class, gender, oppression. And I could speak as somebody who is a son of immigrants, who is a son of working class Black folks who came to this country and had to struggle every inch to be able to settle and make what they had here, to give me an opportunity to have an education, to be where I'm at. And all of those barriers that my grandmother, who came here as a domestic worker, experienced as a Black person, as a woman, as an immigrant, as a domestic worker, all of those barriers, those are barriers that all of us, regardless of where you are, class, gender, or race, should be focused on, so that we could create a society where instead of the exceptions, everybody has an opportunity to thrive. Everybody has a pathway to thrive. And to me, that's the difference. One of the fundamental differences between progressives and people on the left and our opponents, our corporate opponents and people on the far right, that sort of believe this idea that you could just pull yourself up from your bootstraps. And we know that that's not true in a society that has all of these divisions that have been laid bare, like you said before, by COVID-19, and laid bare, I think, by our social movements. And so I think this is also a rare opportunity for all of us, where we're sort of peeling back that veneer that you can pull yourself up from the bootstraps, and this reality that these systemic forms of oppression exist. And so over the past few months, we've witnessed, for example, the fact that Black folks were 13% of the population, 33% of the COVID-19 deaths, right? That racial disparity around healthcare has existed for generations, but COVID-19 is exposing it in a way where we all have to focus on it now. And many, many of our loved ones, and I'd like to send condolences to you and your family, many, many of our loved ones, at this point, more than 150,000 of our loved ones, our cherished family members, our community members have perished. Yes, of course, because we have a pandemic that is running rampant around the world, but also these are political failures, and these are structural failures that we have to focus on as a global community and as a community in this country. And unfortunately, far too many of our leaders are playing politics and attempting to politicize and racialize and use the deaths of our loved ones as a political football. And my question to people is, given all of the death, given all of the harm, given the hundreds of thousands of people who are sick the more than 150,000 people who have perished, what do we owe our fallen loved ones? What is our responsibility to our fallen loved ones, given the despair that could have been prevented, the political deaths? And to me, it means that we have to work extra hard to ensure that we right these wrongs and that we don't prop up the systems that brought us here, but we build anew resilient systems that could withstand the next crisis. And to me, that's again the difference between the politics, of the far right and the politics that you're ushering in. And one of the reasons why I think it's so important that we do everything in our power to make sure that you get to victory, right? Because it's simply not just about, as amazing as you are, as a politician and as an activist and as an organizer and as somebody that's rooted in your community, ensuring that you're victorious means that our concept of what justice and freedom looks like is also on the ballot when you win, which is why I think it's so important that we need to ensure that we understand that Ilhan Omar and her victory, and also all of the people on the other side who are piling in, dark money to challenge her. The reason why they're doing that is because they understand that your victory is much deeper than your personal victory. It's a victory for all of our politics, and it's a victory for the idea that we could do these very, very big things.
Thank you, Maurice, so much. And, I really do appreciate everything that you all are doing to actually have that resonate with everyone, right? For us to understand what's really at stake. And, there's so many progressive organizations here in Minnesota who endorsed our campaign, who are every single day pounding the pavement, talking to people, and really addressing many of what we've addressed tonight.
Yeah.
And speaking clearly about what this challenge really means and what message we get to send once this challenge is defeated, because this is a message that's being sent to us, and it's being sent to progressives across the country. It's being sent to many of our colleagues in Congress, and it's a message that says, if you think outside of the box, right? If you shake the table too much, if you speak up for those that shouldn't be spoken up for, you are going to face this kind of onslaught of not just money, but insult and assault, right? And we now get an opportunity to say, we're better than that, right? We know what progressive values look like. We know what champions for us in. We have, organizers and advocates and activists in Congress who are not only doing the work of organizing us, advocating for us, but legislating, right? And turning our cries in the street to legislation. So I just really am grateful for our partnership and the work that we've been able to do and that we'll continue to do. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Let's get to victory.
So finally on deck is my sister in service, Ayanna Pressley of Massachusetts. Ayanna, you there?
I'm here. Can you see me?
Yes, I can hear you. How are you? As I was saying, table shakers, I was thinking of you, because that's one of the things that you say is often what is really unique about the leadership of Black women. That we don't only show up to tell the truth, to have a vision of what it means to create space for our communities, but we also, right, are table shakers. And so it's really good to have you with me here, sis. How are you?
Oh, it's good to be with you too in this virtual community, and I'm so appreciative. The very first campaign I ever worked on, I was 10 years old. But my first professional job on a campaign was as a volunteer coordinator. So I know just how much they are truly the lifeblood of every campaign, of every movement. And so I just want to give it up to the activists, the agitators, the movement builders, the coalition builders. Thank you for your sacrifice. Thank you for laboring in love. Thank you for your sweat equity. That's the only way that Ilhan and I can do what we're doing. WFP and Rashida and Alex and Bonnie and so many others, we're ushering in a politics, not a transaction, but a transformation. This is about transformational politics. And that does require everyone that is willing to bring their full heart and their purpose feet, to this work to play a role. And the fact that you have been doing this so robustly, so vigorously in the midst of a pandemic is as much a testament to how extraordinary my sister Ilhan is, as it is a testament to each and every one of you. So I've been loving all the images, and Rashida and Alex and Bonnie, and so laugh to myself because Ilhan, every day is a day of action for you. So just make it one big banner. Make it one big banner.
Yeah.
I didn't realize at first that Alex and I weren't going to be on at the same time. I wanted to tease her a little bit because have you been following this Room Raider stuff online?
Yeah.
Come on, look at what I'm working with.
I know.
Think about this. I got the squad pin on. I got my resistance hoops on. I got all of the campaigns we support. Alex's room is like a hostage room.
I know.
What is that?
Remember when we did the squad victory fund thing?
Yeah.
I was teasing her that she needs to get out of
upgrade.
Room. And I mean, she's working on it. She's busy.
She's busy. she's just a little busy, saving our democracy.
Yeah, I got jealous of your signs. That's why I'm in my campaign office doing this tonight.
It looks good. It looks good. But it's wonderful to be with you, and again, just appreciate your entire team, but really just all the volunteers that recognize what's at stake. What I love when I see, even in the midst of this pandemic, so many people around you, Ilhan, it's like people try to push this narrative as if we don't know what's at stake, like we don't show up. I mean, look at the lines in Georgia and Kentucky, people waiting 6 hours to vote. That is a myth. We know what is at stake. We do show up, even in the midst of voter intimidation and suppression tactics, even with all this corporate money being funneled into your campaign. The fact that your average contribution is $18, I mean, that shows you the depth of this movement and that this is about community. And I think people get like our righteous rage twisted. That righteous rage is rooted in love. You often use the word radical, right? It's rooted in like radical justice and radical love and radical community. And I do want to say this because today is James Baldwin Day, right? And very often, our patriotism is questioned. But I love this quote from James Baldwin. He says, "I love America more than any other country in the world. And it is exactly for this reason I insist on the right to criticize her perpetually." Yes. Right?
That is one of my favorite James Baldwin quote. It is just, I mean, and for me, like that is what I feel. Oftentimes it is out of love, right? Out of admiration, out of gratitude. And I kind of sometimes, sort of give the example of, a lot of people want to treat me as a guest in this country, right? They're like, you don't get to have the right to criticize. You don't get to have the right to push for transformative change. You weren't born here and all of this. And I'm like, yes, okay, sure, that makes sense. But let me say this. When you in your house, when you have a guest come over, you serve that guest. You do everything for them, right? They sit, they eat, and then they leave. And you don't expect them to, clean. You don't expect them to cook. You don't expect them to tidy up afterwards. You don't expect them to rearrange your living room to make it, right, like livable. But if that guest that you've invited now starts living with you, and they're living there a month, a year, 10 years, 20 years, what's your expectation? They're no longer a guest. This is their home.
Right.
So you do want them to help rearrange the furniture to make it livable. You want them to cook a meal, right? Like you want them to pay rent. You want them to do everything that you would expect of yourself and others who are living there. And so for me, that is how I see myself. Like I show my gratitude in my service, in the ways in which I show up for my community. And I've done that since I was 14. And I never really understood this idea that you are supposed to remain a guest when you come to the United States as a refugee, because this is my home. And I want there to be, a shiny, beautiful living room, right? Like I want the rent paid. I want the lights on. I want a meal cooked, right? I want everybody to be comfortable. And so I do that work every single day. I do the work of trying to serve my neighbors. I do the work of taking care of my community. I do the work of serving in Congress, speaking up for all of us and addressing, right, like the systematic injustices that exist and the social and economic neglects that have been very visible to me, because I imagined a country that didn't have those things when I arrived. And the fact that I notice it much more visibly than many people do has stayed with me from the age of being a young girl. Nobody had to explain to me, right, in any kind of way. I didn't have to go to school. I didn't have to study. I didn't have to live in poor neighborhood. Like I walked into it. And so I've lived with that urgency of like, this is not the way it's supposed to be.
That's right. And I want to say that's exactly why we need you, Ilhan. And I want to ask people to invest in Ilhan, go to ilhan.com, continue to invest in her and to support her, because this is a revolution and revolutions require resources. And, we don't have to give Ilhan anything. She has earned our loyalty. She has earned our investment. She is working so hard. And I just want to lift that up for a moment because, as we reflect on the life of John Lewis, we've been revisiting many of our what I consider the original architects of the Black Lives Matter movement, okay? Because as we have seen with movements, they will try to co-opt it and undermine it and sanitize it and whitewash it. But the Black Lives Matter activists that are today called Antifa were in the 1960s being called communists, okay? They were just as disruptive and agitating the status quo and just as impatient. And, Dr. King said that the three greatest evils are poverty, racism, and militarism. And I just want to say that you honor very well that civil rights tradition. I loved when I was at the homegoing for Representative Lewis on Thursday, Mr. Lawson, who is the architect of nonviolence, was saying that the civil rights movement became the foundation for every piece of progressive legislation that was moved. So we would not have Medicare and Medicaid. There would not be fair housing laws. So we cannot even, it is marginalizing the movement even just to make it about the full emancipation of Black Americans or about voting rights. That movement gave us the blueprint for every other progressive movement. Right. And you honor that legacy and that tradition. And whether it's from, fostering diplomacy and speaking out against, war and militarism and championing peace and diplomacy, whether it is addressing food insecurity, whether it's doing the work that you and I have done together specifically around the school of confinement pathway. Again, you've been in proximity to these issues. So you know that Black children, including Black girls who are often lost in that equation, have been criminalized in our schools simply for how they show up. And there's more girls justice involved than ever before, more women incarcerated than ever before. And I thank you so much for your partnership on the End Push Out Act. And it was wonderful to be with you in your district to spend time with young people in juvenile detention, as well as with Attorney General Ellison, more about that issue.
Yeah, no, I'm so grateful. I was door knocking today in one of the suburban cities I visited, and there was a young woman who came up to me, and she was talking to me about the ways in which she felt there was injustice in her schooling. And she spoke about a lot of trauma that she'd experienced. And she recently graduated, and she said, I feel more comfortable sharing my story today because I want to make sure no one else suffers what I've suffered, because in many cases I suffered silently. And I told her about our legislation. I told her from the that the policy was born out of a conversation we had with many young girls like her.
Yeah.
And I also shared with her that we also have proximity to this issue, and that we are doing everything that we can to try to make sure that conversations that haven't been had in Congress are taking place, and that we are addressing the institutional changes that need to take place in order for all of our children to feel whole and cared for and invested in our schools.
That's right.
From preschool to high school.
That's right.
And she was in tears, and we were both standing there crying, and I'm reminded every day, that there, as Alex and I were discussing, there are so many people who show up in Congress who are sent by these corporations, who are advocating for policies that get to be prioritized and pushed and implemented without much debate, without much input. And for the policies that we speak for that are actually going to have a positive impact and address not just trauma, but disinvestment in many of our children's lives, many of our communities who are living in the margins of society, many folks who are disabled. Those become the kind of policies that people say are aspirational. They're policies that people say they're, high in the sky. They're policies people say, this just doesn't seem like it needs to get addressed. And there are so many people that just get so excited that every single day, every policy we are introducing in Congress really addresses the pain in which they are living with and have felt for so long that no one was listening.
Yeah, I heard you all saying that earlier.
That I use as a motivation, to continue to show up and do this work.
That's right. And I thought the way that it was framed earlier when you and Alex was talking is the most authentic way to characterize what we seek to do, which is to offer responsive legislation. I always say policy is my love language, and that's because, we have seen hate, hurt, and harm for generations be precise in how it has been codified through lawmaking. That hurt and hate and harm didn't just happen, it was legislated. And so the path forward for equity, for justice must also be legislated. That's why you work so hard on amendments. That's why you work so hard on introducing bills. That's why you work so hard when we have bills on the floor that are going to impact the lives of people, that you whip those votes, that you play a role in leadership to make sure that that happens. And I thank you for that, because, you know, that is very time consuming and you did not have to take that on. It's like every leadership opportunity, you know, you see Ilhan is just raising her hand, you know, I'll take it on, I'll take it on, I'll take it on. And I think that's about who she is and how she's wired. But I think it's also she's emboldened by the mandate that the district has given her and the expectation of that and to meet that. So yes, we are unapologetically bold and aspirational. I would rather be aspirational than ambitious. You know, this is not about our trajectory. This is again about how you're always reiterating that which is systemic. We don't want exceptional one-offs. That's not to give short shrift to the sacrifices that our families made so that we could be exceptions to the rule. But for the grace of God go I, as my mother taught me. And so the reality is that these exceptional one-offs are not enough. We want structural change. We want systemic change. And that demands law change. And so I so appreciate your leadership and your partnership in the midst of this. We're dealing with 3 crises, right? So a global pandemic, and then the only thing that COVID-19 could not stop, racism, so police brutality, and then the financial hardship. I mean, as evidence of how disconnected and removed our colleagues across the aisle are, is that they would think that a family could subsist on $17 a day for 10 weeks, $1,200, a one-time cash infusion, and that was early in the pandemic. And so being a progressive means to progress. So how do you do that? You are a pace setter. This is what you do, Ilhan. You lead from the front. In March, you started advocating for rent cancellation and eviction moratorium. And I joined you, and a handful of others joined you in that, because we could see the forest for the trees. We knew how this was going to go. We were already in an affordable housing crisis. Ilhan, when we came to Congress, we were in a federal government shutdown. We already knew that the average American doesn't even have $400 worth of savings to weather a disruptive life event, never mind a global pandemic. And then we also know that burden is disproportionately borne by Black and brown folks. So you're not supposed to pay more than 30% of your income on rent, but most people are paying 16, 80%. That was already true. So today is August 2nd. 30% of Americans said they're not going to be able to pay August rent. And for Black America, that's 46%. So the work that you do on housing is a racial justice issue. It is an economic justice issue, and it is a public health issue. You cannot evict people in the midst of a global pandemic when we are seeing surges throughout the country. How do you slow the rate of transmission? So I just thank you for your leadership. I mean, whoever's watching this, if you all don't get it, I don't know, because we've got the receipts. We've got the receipts on the amendments passed and the bills introduced. And, you know, this isn't easy. Don't think that just because we're in a Democratic majority. Ilhan, we just now brought DC statehood to the floor for a vote. How many decades did it take to get to 218 co-sponsors for that to come to the floor? Disenfranchisement of people who pay more taxes than anyone else in a predominantly Black city.
Yeah. And I'm sure the same people who are telling me right now that my Homes for All and, you know, Green New Deal and all of that are aspirational probably would have said the same thing to Eleanor, that they're aspirational. Don't make it wrong for you to do the work.
That's right. I mean, look at Medicare for All. I mean, where's that? I don't ride the polar coaster on any of this, because, you know, the best data is informed by the lives of real people. So we already knew that we needed Medicare for All, even before this pandemic, because you shouldn't have to be wealthy in order to be healthy. People should not be going bankrupt to be healthy. But look where that's polling. If you put stock in that, the national consciousness has completely moved on that. And the same is true when it comes to rent cancellation and, you know, moratoriums. I mean, I think none of us could have foreseen how long we'd be dealing with this, but because of the criminal negligence and the sluggish response and the science denials of this administration, we find ourselves where we are. So thank you for being a true progressive and leading from the front with your little tiny self.
Well, I mean, I think you said pace setter, and pace setting is what we, I think about when we think about the progressive movement, right? Leading with your progressive values. It's about having a vision. It's about setting the pace for what is possible, and using really the lives of people who are going to be impacted by these policies as the data that informs that policy. And so I really want, one, to thank you for joining me, and two, just for the many opportunities that we've had to really work on policies that actually get to the heart of many of the systematic issues that exist in our communities, right? Like I think about the task force to address the maternal mortality rate,
Yes.
Black community in which you flew into Minneapolis to have that conversation with my constituents, for us to dream about policies that will address that, and for your leadership and for the leadership of Robin, Kelly, in trying to really hone in on pieces of what it means for us to have the opportunity to holistically address that. Because we know Medicare for All is a step, right, to addressing that, but we also know that there are other barriers that we understand as Black women that have contributed to that high maternal mortality rate in the Black community that we get to now address and legislate. And the Push Out Act that came out of many of the conversations that you led with young people and the conversations we had with young people here in Minneapolis when we visited detention centers. And I know, we're on many economic policies that are also informed by the 3-day conversations that we had when you came to our district to hear directly from our constituents, specifically in the Black community, who are really oftentimes forgotten in the ways in which we address racial disparities. Nobody, and you were shocked when I told you that Minneapolis is the worst.
Still don't believe it. 26, I still don't believe it.
Black people live in, because we have severe disparities, right? Not only in education, but in healthcare, in home ownership, in economic stability, in asset building, in wealth building. I mean, just name anything, right? Like Black people here in Minneapolis are on the bottom of all of that. And, to all of you to honor me, within few months of getting in, to join me in hearing directly from my constituents on what the challenges and the opportunities were, and then working every single day, right? Like in addressing those issues, not just for us, but for the collective Black community in our country.
Ilhan, I have to interrupt because we haven't spoken about, and we have to wrap up. But I didn't bring up student debt. I got to bring that up because that's an issue that we partnered on. And so, listen, every movement begins with language. Someone has to speak on it first. You can't work on it if you don't see it. And you can't bring others along if you don't call it out. And student debt is one of those issues that now again has commanded the national consciousness, but forever was an issue that was sort of marginalized. And this is an issue that you championed right away because you also represent one of the youngest districts. It's an issue that I partnered with you on early because I represent a district that is a higher education mecca. And we have like 855,000 federal borrowers. And we know that Black and Latinx students borrow and default more than anyone else because of those policies that denied our families the opportunity to build generational wealth. And so to be partnering with you on the issue of student debt cancellation, especially in pushing for it in our relief bills.
Or here in Minnesota for the amount of debt young people have in the country.
Oh, wow. So this is a $1.6 trillion student debt crisis. The average borrower is saddled with about $30,000 worth of debt. So that is choking at the promise of folks. that is choking and denying their ability for home ownership. And people think it's just a millennial issue. It isn't. In my state of Massachusetts, we have teachers who have debt because they wanted to be educators and they've lost their licensure to teach because they owe student debt that they can't afford to pay back. In the midst of this pandemic, Betsy DeVos, and you know how I feel about her, in the midst of this, and I know you share those sentiments, but that's a conversation for another time, they were garnishing people's wages in the midst of a pandemic. 54,000 people, they garnished their wages because they couldn't pay their student debt. So I know you share my belief, Ilhan, that we can't have a comprehensive post-COVID recovery economically without student debt cancellation for both federal and private borrowers. It's really key.
I mean, and just those, as you talked about, educators who had to take massive amount of debt just so that they can teach our children because they love, right, getting the opportunity to teach. And I think about one of our colleagues and one of my, favorite people to serve with, Ayanna Johanna Hayes, who I get to be on the Education and Labor Committee. She's someone who has massive amounts of student debt. I have student debt. Alex talks about her student debt, but Johanna's is right, like to a degree of crisis, and she's talked about it many a times. And it is out of her love for our children and wanting to have the opportunity to get the tools that she needed in order to continue to educate them. And like people make it sound like, it's an irresponsible thing, and that we were, we're not being thoughtful, and that's how we ended up with student debt. No, this is a systematic problem. The promise of education should be alive in our country. Education is to the benefit of society. Every single aspect of you getting educated works to better our nation, right? And so there was a time, I think, we used to think, up to 8th grade education was fine, right? And then we said, well, we need more. And we got to 12th grade. And then we said we should start preschool. And now we've invested in preschool. And we have to get in the mindset of recognizing, right, that higher education is part of what it means for us to invest in people so that our nation is
better
for it.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's why Obama says educators are nation builders, because they pour into people who build up our world, who build up our nation. So, well, I don't know what else I could say except for 3 words. Send her back. Okay? Read my lips. Send her back. I'm talking about Ilhan, the one and only. I love you, my sister.
I love you too. And I can't wait to have you over again. I mean, you've now made 2 visits to Minneapolis.
Yes.
And a third just needs to happen.
I will come for the safari almond cake and for the Somali tea that you make, because you make it the best in the world. And to be in community. To be in community.
A great conversation to community.
That's right. That's right.
But thank you for being my sister, for being on this journey with me, for always having my back, for making me laugh, for caring for me, and for giving me the opportunity to share my constituents with you many a times, and for doing the same for me as I've visited your constituents as well. And having really this opportunity for us, right, as Black women, to work on issues that really address the heart of some of the systematic, persistent problems that exist in our community. So thank you, and hopefully we'll see you next week.
I hope so. Grateful for you and everyone. Okay.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to every single organizer, volunteer who has poured in to today, who has done everything that they can, whether it is at the doors, whether it's texting, making phone calls, we really greatly appreciate your effort in reaching our voters here in the 5th. And again, we have 9 more days to go. We're really excited. I always say you get what you organize for. And as Alex said, and Ayanna, we are going to put in the work as if, this is the first time we're running, because it isn't just about reaching voters to come out and vote. It's about solidifying what is important to people and uplifting those voices so that we can continue to fight for our progressive values here in Minnesota and in our country. So thank you for contributing. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for watching our live event. So see you all soon. Bye.